We just executive, so we're go right into the next meeting.
You have no motions pending?
No
correct?
motions pending. Okay, with that said, previous minutes, any questions, concerns? Okay, I entertain a motion to accept those.
I'll make the motion.
Sarah made a motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Okay, on policy, we have a bunch of first reads. Any questions on those, concerns? No? Okay, entertain a motion to accept the first reads.
I'll make the motion.
Rachel made the motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
I'm an aye. On the second read, looks like we have two there. Any questions on those? Okay, entertain a motion to accept those.
I'll make the motion.
Rachel made a motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
I'm an aye. And we have one informational, one to be removed. Any questions on either one of those? It doesn't need a motion. No? Okay. All right. Any prioritization?
Just ask for us to be able to go back into executive to conclude student issue
Okay.
related to the hearing.
All right. All right. Recognition of visitors.
Nobody online, and
Nobody
then
online.
Shauna is here.
Just speak real quick. I just wanted to pop back in real quick, just to kind of update you that I had conversed with Morgan about the snack shack. He sent me the RFP, and the list of contractors that it was sent out to. And the boosters have a meeting tomorrow, so we will review the RFP. It's a little bit out of our, I guess, expertise per se, but just to kind of peek through it and see if there's anything else that we think might need to be in there. Morgan had asked us to take a look at it, and then also the list of contractors, Morgan, to see if there's anybody else that somebody thinks of. The only thing that I saw when I looked at it, and only from an insurance perspective, is I don't know how hard and fast some of these requirements are. Like the excess umbrella liability, if that's a hard and fast requirement, that could potentially deter some people from bidding, just because some of the contractors may not have that type of policy as a rule, and I'm just speaking from my experience on the insurance side. And then with the workers' comp, if they don't have employees and they're using subcontractors, they're not necessarily gonna have a workers' comp policy themselves. So I guess I wasn't sure how hard and fast those requirements were within that process.
That's, yeah, we can talk about that
It's
when
up
we
for
meet the
okay.
following week.
When I looked at it, that was the only thing that jumped out at me. I think I would just double check with Mike. Anthony, I don't know if you know anything about this, probably not, the stuff that was taken out. It would probably just be good before the RFP goes out to put eyes on all of the fixtures that were supposedly saved, just to make sure that that's another thing that I saw. So I just wanted to pop in quickly and let you know where that was at from our end, and I'll double back to Morgan. He was gonna check with Vern and see if there was a time when the three of us could sit down and review it.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Either or.
Thank you, Shauna. Thanks, Shauna.
Okay. We'll jump right into the school spotlight.
Okay, I have SJ Marcotte here. Her and Emily Kimball have done some work, really just formalizing a lot of our processes around collecting student evidence. So she is going to share what all of our teachers at Cole Career Center are now doing with our students.
Hello, thanks for having me here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to showcase, I'll always showcase what we're doing here at Cole Hollow Career Center. As Nate mentioned, Emily, Cole, and I have actually invested quite a bit of time this summer on several initiatives, including this one, in formalizing our student portfolios here at Cole Hollow. So the goal,
We're trying, it's not
it's the slide.
There we go.
Our overall goal with our student portfolios in this building is to strengthen and standardize how we are capturing, documenting, communicating student learning, showcasing evidence of that learning in ways that are relevant and that will matter to students both now in their educational journey, but especially for their career and post-secondary readiness as well. So really looking at a system that works for them now and that they can take with them that will be easy and relevant for the future as well. So just a little bit of context. The collection of evidence is a really important tenet in career and technical education, not just here in this building, but everywhere. Because CTE is so focused on hands-on learning across our programs, we here in this building and beyond this building have used a variety of methods and portfolio formats to capture student learning. So this is not something new. But what we know from our past experience is that when students have evidence of what they know and what they can do and where their skills are, that has been able to help them get hired at higher levels. It's been able to help them be competitive in programs, whether that's apprenticeships or post-secondary programs that are competitive. It has helped to give them an edge and has helped them be more confident in communicating what they know and can do. And that shows up very commonly, for example, in job interviews, where our students at 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, and even as they start their careers, have a level of confidence that we don't always see with students because they have a very strong grasp on what their skills are and what they're able to do with those skills. So the work that Emily and I engaged in was really about capturing what our programs are already doing and already doing well, and then standardizing a portfolio process across our programs so that we had something, or we have something that's common that all of us can be both communicating about, utilizing professional development time, building on, and being able to really collaborate effectively across programs with a common format. And we also wanted to make sure that we could really reflect the full range of what our students are doing in our two-year programs. So this includes both their academic skills, their technical skills, their employability skills, so those three buckets of skill area that all of our programs focus on, but also captures the nuance of things like their work-based learning, the industry-recognized credentials and certifications that our students are earning, their participation in career and technical student organizations like FFA and FBLA, Ed Rising, Skills USA, HOSA, because all of those experiences across the 2 or 3 years that our students are in this building are producing an incredible volume of both knowledge, understanding, and skills. And we want to make sure that we have a way that we can capture that for our students and for our stakeholders. And something that is like tangible, that we can say, here is the proof of what I can do as a result of my time at Cole Public. So we went into the work this summer with that purpose in mind. And what Emily and I did is we did a deep dive into what each program has historically already been doing and currently doing. We reached out to our connections in CTE around the state and beyond to dig into what's being done across the state and nationally to look at some good models. And we also did an overhaul of our employability skills, which has been kind of a work in progress over a number of years, and really dug in also into our work-based learning expectations and opportunities and models. And from there, we built out a physical portfolio. I'm going to pass this around. This is a mock-up that we put together for instructors. So this is instructor facing, but all of the sections that you will see in here are the sections that are in the student portfolios with some explanations. And I've got some additional things that I'm going to show you, but if you want to flip through or take a look at this, this is the mock-up. One of the things that we captured as well or noticed was a gap is we recognize as instructors, I've been here for 13 years, so I've kind of seen a lot of things and a lot of, have a pretty good pulse on what's happening in the building. And Emily and I both recognize that there are experiences that our students have that we don't have a good way of capturing tangible evidence for. So we did two things. One, we developed an in-house certificate that each is branded for each program. So we have both a skills verification and a certificate of completion that have a variety of options for the back of the certificate to be able to document either technical standards or academic standards or credentials or whatever the thing was. And that could be for a workshop or for a guest speaker who came in and did something hands-on or for an off-site experience that really did result in some skill development or practice with a way to document it that a student could print and put in their portfolio. We also have been communicating with some of our community partners to help support us in that as well, and that includes this first one that we've been able to do is through North Country Federal Credit Union, who's our financial partner. They come in and do financial reality fairs with our students and offer hands-on workshops. And so I worked with our contact there and asked them if they could produce something for our students that would document, like here are the competencies or the standards or the information that I interacted with. Here's what a student would have gained from this experience, so that they have that tangible thing. Not just that they can say that they did it, but they've got some proof to back it up. So what I'd like to provide to you tonight is, I apologize that this is a little bit small, but I was trying to save paper, so it's printed 2 up. This is the portfolio table of contents. Just to give you a sense of, and this is just our revised employability skills. I'm not going to go deep into that, but if you've been around, you may have seen iterations of this, and this is an important part of our portfolio. So we're looking at the product now. So these are the categories that Emily and I decided, at least to start with. It's going to be a living, breathing thing. We've already made modifications in the couple of months that we've started using this. But these are the areas of the portfolio that we have been testing out. So in the document coming around, you'll see the breakdown in professional documents. By the end of a student's 2 years in any of our programs, they will have a professional resume. They may have many. For example, my students have their multiple iterations of their resume, because resumes are not static documents. So their resume, their cover letter, a professional statement, all kinds of work around career planning, which can look different from student to student and from program to program. But there are some things that we are requiring for all students in that personal and professional development section. There's a section for employability skills. We are standardizing this year that once a quarter, students will do self-reflections for their employability skills. We celebrate them with Student of the Month awards every single month, and that is not a new practice, but it is a way to reinforce to our students that these skills are really, really important, and so we will celebrate them. But we've standardized in this portfolio that we want students reflecting on their skills in that area, and we've enhanced and will continue to enhance the resources available to instructors to help continue to enhance and support the instruction and assessment of those skills. We have a section that is program specific, so that students have a section to gather evidence that would be connected to specifically their program. My students, for example, in their section, we've got 3 portfolios here today. We have permission from students to use them tonight. Caitlin is a student in my program from MVU, and her program-specific section has all of her work from her 2 embedded college classes. So Effective Workplace Communication has examples of all of her specifically written communication in a variety of formats, and she is building out right now, as all of my students are, their business plan for intro to business. All of that evidence will be in here. That's program specific. Other programs like forestry, Ella Kane's, if you went to hers, there's a lot of IRCs, industry recognized credentials and trainings. They gave them logging results, land management plans that are specific to forestry and natural resources. So this section will look different from program to program. Our automotive program have all of their checklists from their national skills program.
ASC.
Thank you, ASC, where students will be going through and documenting as they meet those requirements. Certifications and IRCs, that's industry recognized credentials, super important part of all of our programs. This year we are committing that all of our students will get first aid, CPR, and AED training, because all people in all jobs have to work with humans. So as a basic, what we call in CTE a tier 1, does not necessarily mean that you can get a better job, a higher paying job, but it is a safety training that is helpful in no matter what you're doing. So everyone would have that, and then every program has a variety of those certifications, so there's a section for that. There's also a section for work-based learning, and I won't go into a lot of detail about that tonight, but Emily and I have formalized and continue to revamp and revisit our work-based learning processes. So this year that includes some very concrete processes for applying for work-based learning opportunities that are consistent across programs, documentation, employer evaluations, and all of those documents will be in the student's portfolio. CTSOs are our career and technical student organizations. And again, not a requirement, but available to all students with tons of opportunities to develop leadership, to develop skills, to earn recognition, awards, scholarships, so a section for students to be documenting that. We intentionally added a personal finance section because we know it is something that we are focusing on as a graduation requirement. It is something that has been personally really important to me in my curriculum, and I've been involved with Jumpstart and a variety of other organizations working in the state and nationally to ensure that students have access to quality personal finance education while they're in high school. And I know in my work here in the SU that is something that we are working toward. We thought it would be appropriate for us here in Career and Tech Ed to make sure that all of our programs have a section for personal finance so that our instructors can be intentional about where they can weave that content in. At the very least, we bring North Country in to do hands-on work that's available to all of our students. And then the final section is awards and recognitions, so that students have a place to, both at the end of their 2 years, we have formalized recognition for levels of program completion that will be rolling out for the first time this year, so students can earn program completer status by just completing the 2 years, and then opportunities to earn distinction based on things like work-based learning, their employability, skill achievement, so that for students who this may be the place, this may be the only place in their educational career that they have really locked in, plugged in, felt like they could proceed with success, that we want ways to celebrate that and to give them recognition. So that will be included, but this could also include like National Technical Honor Society memberships. It could include awards and recognitions from outside of this building. So there's nothing about this portfolio that limits them to only putting things in from their program. There might be other things from work or from outside of school that they would want to include that would be relevant here. So what we're finding in terms of the outcomes, well, we don't know what the ultimate outcomes will be in an ongoing process. But in this first quarter and a little bit, we have seen a tremendous amount of student pride in these physical portfolios. And in some ways it might feel to you like this is going backwards in a digital world. But what we are finding is that students are craving something that they can put their hands on. They are craving something tangible, and they are taking pride in it. Across programs, we're hearing students say things like, oh, this goes in my portfolio, or should I print a copy to put in my portfolio? Can I put this in my portfolio? Or for example, after a field trip or a college visit or an industry visit, we have a reflection form that we're requiring all students to do, both for networking, so that they can document, like, I went and I met, you know, Miss Dean, and I was in that school, and I did this and this and this, and this is what I observed, and this is how I could see myself fitting in an environment like this, or whatever the case may be. They can go back and see the contact and where it was and when it was for networking purposes, but also because we know reflection is an important part of learning, that they're getting a chance to take all of those experiences seriously and see how it fits into growth and to skill development. I had personally in my class, we had a guest speaker come in, and it was off my radar because we're still learning, we're still getting used to the routines. I had the executive director, maybe not the executive director, a person from Voices Against Violence come in and speak to my FBLA leaders because they were doing an awareness campaign for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And afterward, 2 or 3 of them got up and grabbed their portfolios. And I was like, oh, that's not what we're doing right now. And they're like, no, we just had a guest speaker, we have to do our reflection. And so they sat down and they did it, and they put it right in their portfolios. So we're seeing students already developing a habit of capturing their evidence, collecting it, taking pride in it, and we're really excited to see where this continues to go. As you'll see from these binders, we already have students collecting some incredible evidence. Some of these have, we've got students that have a dozen IRCs, industry recognized credentials, at 17 or 18 years old. We're not even halfway through their second year. Or evidence from 2 or 3 or 4 college courses that they've completed. Resumes that are ready to go. Evidence that they can perhaps take back to their high schools as we continue to evolve and develop our plans for graduation requirements. We're trying to make sure that we're ready for that, whatever that ends up being. But also portfolios that students can take with them when they do job interviews, when they visit their post-secondary institutions. Because this is powerful. This is building student confidence and being able to say, this is what I can bring to you. This program, this apprenticeship, this job. And that empowers students, it gives them a sense of purpose and belonging, and I think really is reinforcing the value of our programs. So, I do have these here, we do have permission for you to look at them, so I'll leave them out. I don't want to take up any more of your time tonight, but you can feel free to peruse through these student portfolios. And if there's any questions that you have or you'd like to come in and learn more about what we're doing, I know Nate. I'm speaking for Nate.
You are.
I'm guessing the door is always open. You can always come and see me upstairs in business leadership. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, SJ.
Yep. Nate, your second one?
Is that
Ready for your second one?
second?
Oh, it's not in? Okay.
So, can I introduce?
Yes.
I can be ready for anything.
That was a test. Let's go, right? So Callie Goss is joining us. Callie has been working part-time for us as our social emotional learning coordinator. And Callie did a presentation at the SU board meeting in November, I believe. And we talked at our pre-meeting about how it would be useful, because I think there are some misconceptions about when you hear the word social emotional learning. I think that it's been politicized a bit. And I think Callie does a really good job of making it tangible so people can understand what skills are we working on with our students and why. So she's here today, and welcome, Callie. Sorry to make you wait for a bit, but we appreciate you being here.
I just realized the plan was to share my slides. Oh, Courtney just fixed the permissions, so all set. 1 second. All right. Are we good? Actually, I can see the public view. So Lynn already did an introduction. Hello, everybody. I am Callie Goss. I'm here to give you a window into not only how we teach, but also how we're monitoring our teaching and learning of social and emotional skills within our district. So before we get started, I wanted to remind us, or I guess ground us in the SEL board goal that was made about 3.5 years ago at this point. It states by June of 2027, each student in our district will demonstrate growth in the core skills of self-awareness, self-management, agency and adaptability, self-aware or social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making over an academic year. Now, this is kind of the guiding light for our work, and you'll notice some skills are in parentheses. Those are synonyms. The difference is only the wording and the program or resource that we're using. So the words in parentheses are the vocabulary that we use in our district to name some of these core skills. Now, if this is our guiding light and it's about core skills, it helps to think about what we're actually talking about when we say core skills, because like Lynn mentioned, SEL as an acronym has kind of become a buzzword and not always in a positive light. So if you think about core skills in terms of specific behaviors, the term SEL becomes a lot less controversial. So when we're talking about these 6 core skills that we hope all students show improvement in, we're really talking about self-awareness. So can you name strengths in yourself and others? Do you recognize when you're being influenced by others? If you are adaptable or show adaptability, your skill at not letting other people's negative emotions impact you. If you're empathetic, you not only notice when others are happy, but take time to understand their point of view. People who are collaborative can work with others to resolve conflict. They're good at not only giving feedback, but taking it as well. When you have a sense of agency, you can stand up for yourself without putting others down. And people with a strong sense of purpose can name their passions, and then they make decisions that line up with what's important to them or line up with their values. So you'll notice when you break down these core skills into specific behaviors, it becomes a lot less controversial. And I would say these specific behaviors are actually not at all controversial, because that these are exactly what we want, not only for our students, but our own children, our own families, and our own friendships at work, at home. These are all really pro-social behaviors that we hope for ourselves and other people. So now if we think about what these core skills look like in practice, here's a scenario that is familiar to not only all the classrooms in our district, but any classroom anywhere, especially if you have visited a classroom recently or if you have teaching experience, this sounds familiar. So I'm going to give you a chance to read. I see that it's on the board. Read it on your own. And as you're reading, ask yourself which core skill at the bottom is kind of manifesting itself into this situation, or which lack of a core skill is leading to this scenario. So to summarize, a kid named Jamie tries to take charge in a group project that's been assigned. It goes awry when other people start chiming in, and then the situation escalates. So we're going to return to this scenario after we take a look at some data related to social skills. So now when we think about how to measure these, or how we're kind of keeping a pulse on our teaching and learning social skills in our district, it helps to understand that teaching or assessing really social skills is very different than assessing academic skills. So if you think about the academic skill of decoding or being able to solve words, once that skill has been broken down and you understand it, you can apply it in any scenario. Like the word measuring, after I understand how to break down that word, I will always be able to read it no matter what context it's in. Now, if we think about a core skill like agency, one of the factors of agency, or one of the smaller skills within agency, is I can stand up for myself without putting other people down. A lot of people would call that being assertive, right? So being assertive is different because some students and adults really understand cognitively what it means to be assertive, but they don't understand which situations to apply their assertiveness, because we know it's appropriate to be assertive in some scenarios. It's not appropriate to be assertive when you realize you're wrong in an argument with your partner, for example. That's the time that we should use a different social skill. So measuring social skills is different and should be different than measuring academic skills. And really, you should have a pulse on 3 different buckets. So the first is, like, are we teaching what we say we're teaching? Second is school climate and culture. You could probably name some environments you've been in that have really fostered your sense of assertiveness or made you feel comfortable speaking up in a way that doesn't put other people down. You probably could also name some classrooms in your own experience from your own childhood where you didn't feel safe speaking up, or that just wasn't valued in the environment. So we have to monitor our own environment's welcoming for these skills to take root. The last bucket is what skills are students demonstrating or perceiving in themselves. So we currently have systems and processes for all 3 of these buckets. The bucket I'm going to focus on tonight, though, is waypoints, which is our measure of the extent to which students have these social and emotional skills. So if we think about the wording of the board goal, so each student will demonstrate growth in the core skills over an academic year. The way we're thinking about that is not by comparing year 1 versus year 2 versus year 3. If we want all students to show growth over an academic year, or if we really want to make sure every single classroom is an environment where students grow in these 6 areas. We're comparing growth from fall to spring and asking what percentage of students demonstrate growth in each core skill, and then comparing that number from year to year. So I'll show you our first round of assessments that we just completed. And here's a specific example of what students saw on that assessment. So this is a perception measure, which is meant to, again, there are limits of perception measures, but it's one piece of data that can be looked at in kind of corroboration with other sources too. So students would see this statement, I stand up for myself without putting others down. Students in grades 3 through 12 would rate the extent to which they agree with this. Students in grades K to 2 would have their teacher do it for them. So teachers complete ratings for for younger students. And then there's a report that you can look at for different levels. Here's a summary of our district. Excuse me, the green skills were kind of our growth skills, relatively speaking, or sorry, our top skills, relatively speaking. And then the red circles were areas for growth. There's a link to the data if you want to see it by school. I shared that with Courtney and she can put it in the notes also. So while this level of data is interesting to look at and it might lead to some insights about what's going well in general, really we have to get to smaller grain sizes if we want to think about taking action based on the data, or really hone in on how we can support students' social skills that they're practicing in their classroom. So each classroom has a set of data that's broken down into 3 tiers. So the first tier is the 20th to the 100th percentile. So 80% of your top 80% of students. These are students who can, or who perceive that they can apply these skills consistently over context. And then you have your 5th through the 20th percentile. These might be spotty, some concern, and then your bottom 5th percentile and below represent the lowest in their grade band and might be cause for concern, especially when you look at this data together with other pieces of data, or I should say other sources of data that we have on students. So here's an example of what classroom teachers might see. After students completed waypoints, teachers can go in and see the distribution of scores across these 6 core skills. So they can see what their strengths are as a class, where the whole class might benefit from instruction, and then also which skills are strengths for each student. Now, what are we doing with this? We've made a Waypoints data protocol that helps teachers first learn about their class's top and growth skill. So what are your class's strengths? What might you work on as a group? Which students are scoring in that red area? And what else do we know about these students and their current interventions? From there, there's a menu of next steps to take. So depending on bandwidth and resources within teams of teachers. For example, Wayfinder makes it very simple to follow up by taking that growth skill and connecting teachers with like, here's some activities that you could use to support these students. In addition, you might decide, or teachers might decide to design a whole group lesson that supports some of these skills. And then the most intensive, but also the most impactful would be planning an intervention to support groups of students who struggle with or have an area of concern in a certain skill. So this was shared with principals right before Thanksgiving break. Several schools have already had teachers look at their social and emotional data through Waypoints in this way and think about next steps they could take based on the data. And already, so several principals in the room actually have either done that or scheduled it. And that means leading their own data session or asking me for support doing that. The other thing I think to celebrate is this is happening more schools this time than it did last year when we kind of ran a Waypoints trial run at mid-year. Now, another point of celebration I think is found in how we look at interventions or how we think about behavior scenarios like Jamie, which is the vignette we started with. So instead of just looking at Jamie's situation as defiance or as a behavior problem, instead, more and more teachers and leaders are thinking about this in terms of what might we do to intervene to teach Jamie the skills that she needs to work in a group. And by intervene, I also want to differentiate that from interact, because I think that we may be tempted to quickly remind Jamie, remember, everyone in your group needs to be included. That's an interaction. It's not necessarily teaching her any skills. Or responding with, all right, Jamie, you need to take a break, which might be completely reasonable because time away from a space, one, might be needed for Jamie to regulate, and two, we also have to preserve the learning environment for their students. But if that's all we do is ask Jamie to take a break or remove her temporarily, then she'll come back to a group situation the next time struggling with the same thing. So because collaboration is a need, here's what it might look like to actually plan an intervention, either in a small group or individually. So if you think about collaboration as one of those core skills, and I'll ask you to think about collaboration even like in a school board meeting context, the skill of collaboration is actually the result of several tinier skills or behaviors. So like if you show strong collaboration in a board meeting, you probably also can advocate for yourself. So that means like speak up for yourself and the people that you represent. You probably can also self-regulate, which means stay calm and manage hard moments, either personally and with your relationships. And you can probably also communicate well. Now, these skills also have specific behaviors that are teachable with students. So with Jamie in a situation in her classroom, and with adults too, if you're strong in collaboration, you probably understand the skill or the behavior of using exit strategy language when your body's feeling flooded and you're becoming emotional. So like, I need a minute, I need to step away, I feel myself getting frustrated. And if you show strong communication skills when you're working with other people at a board meeting in your family, you probably understand how to use idea building language. So when a conversation is happening and other ideas are floating around, what language can I use to insert my own idea without squashing other people's. So Jamie would meet in a group over the course of 4 to 6 weeks and learn some of these skills that would support her group work. Another thing I wanted to point out too, all of this work, so this intervention, how we're teaching social skills with the whole class, it is all in service of academics. So yes, all of these core skills make for rewarding, fulfilling, pro-social relationships with other people, but it's also helping Jamie access content, because if you are Jamie's teacher, responsible for making sure that she understands certain science concepts, first, she's not accessing any of what happened in the scenario. We first have to teach her things like idea building language or exit strategy language to make sure she can participate in learning experiences like this in the future. And I think more and more we're thinking about what experiences in instruction can support the development of these skills. And that is all that I have for you. Thanks for letting me kind of explain some of the work that we're doing and also celebrate some shifts that are happening in terms of how we build social skills across our district.
Callie, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you breaking it down in this way. I hope for board members this is helpful to see it at the skill level so you can understand that the better we can help students develop these skills, the more successful they can be in their classrooms and in life. And the more accessible I think learning gets for everyone is as people get better and better at these skills. So, thanks, Callie.
Thank you, Callie.
Thank you, Eric.
Any other questions on? Okay. All right, we'll move right on to financial budget.
Okay, while Courtney's pulling up my slide deck, I'll just tell you that we still have not seen a draft of the Enosburg-Richford audit. We do have the SU audit, and that is clean, and that I expect will be going out to SU board members in the next week or so to review, and certainly don't have any concerns. No anticipation that there's going to be anything other than a clean audit for both the districts as well. A lot of this will be duplicative. We covered student enrollment in the last 2 months. In terms of the schedule, we're now here at your third board meeting focused on the budget, still planning to finalize on January 13th. If there is some reason that we feel we're not ready to do that on the 13th, we've got about another week or two before we will have to warn in order to meet the notice deadlines for town meeting day. Board goals we've covered a few times in the past, so I won't spend any time there. Go back one, Courtney. In terms of budget considerations, just want to remind folks, most of this is stuff that we've seen in earlier meetings, but the budget that you have in front of you is down 8.5 FTE. Despite that, and in part because of a large health insurance premium increase again, we are looking at just the health insurance premiums going up in this budget almost $500,000. A lot of that is the increase in the premium. There are a lot of changes every year as well, from people moving off of insurance to our insurance, or from a single to a two-person or two-person to a family plan. And from what I've looked into on this side, there's been a lot of movement on plans as well, so you've got a bit of a double whammy there.
Morgan, when does that, when's the last day they can do that?
Into December.
So it's still
For open enrollment, but if
Right.
somebody has a kid on January 1st, they can change. If somebody has a kid over the
So
summer.
this should still go a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think,
Yep.
can I just make the point here about the Health Connect? So if people are getting their health insurance out through, the name just escaped me, is it Vermont Health Connect?
Yep.
It's on the marketplace.
Exchange.
So the premiums are going up significantly. We had an example of someone in our office who was coming onto our health insurance, and they had just learned that their monthly premium has been $350. And there are subsidy credits that bring it down to that $350. And what they learned was on January 1, that subsidy was now going to be, or not the subsidy, the premium is going to be $2,500 a month for the individual. So I think we are seeing the implications of that with more people coming on to our health insurance plans that's a huge shift for families to endure, employees to endure.
And those, I think we will see by the end of December, but there will be changes throughout the year. Also, dental insurance is going up about 12%, a big percentage increase, but a pretty small line in your budget. So not super material, certainly not as impactful as the health insurance change. We can blow through these next 5 slides in the packet that I sent out to you earlier this afternoon. There's another copy of the staffing plan. That has not changed in the last 2 board meetings, so still moving forward as we expect with the staffing plan we discussed earlier in the fall. It's important to note that even though it's a reduction in FTE, pretty significant reduction, we are moving 2.5 people in from the federal grant into your local budget. So in terms of positions that were actually in your school or anticipated in your school somewhere, that cut is actually a little bit more. Also in your packet that was sent out was the budget detail. Go to the next one, Courtney. You won't be able to see this on the slide, but you should have that in front of you. This is really the painful level of detail that goes into building your budget. I don't anticipate that we'll have any questions. I would love to have people look over this, and if you see something that's kind of out of whack, to call it to my attention to just make sure that our assumptions are solid. But for the most part, this is driven by staffing, and a lot of that is out of your control once we make those initial staffing decisions for who we want in your buildings next year. The budget overview is updated since your last meeting. This now includes revenue projections and tax rate projections. And I think before we get into the details on that, I would just point out that in terms of places where I anticipate this budget changing over the next 4 weeks, we still do not have our FTE for next year for the tech center. So we may have more kids coming in or more of your kids going out to other tech centers. So that could impact both the tuition that you're paying out to other tech centers, and it will also impact what we're charging for revenue coming in for the tech center. Similar with the high school tuition coming in, we're still finalizing things on NMV, and NMV is still waiting on a few tuition bills, so we're trying to figure out where their kids have shown up, and where their kids show up kind of makes us try to predict where this year's 8th graders are going to go for their first year of high school, and how many of those kids that you're going to get. The more of those that you get, the more money that's coming in, and lower your tax rate. Those numbers, tech center numbers, should come in the next couple of weeks, and those last tuition bills should come in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully those numbers will feel firmer before we get into the new year. If you look, better to look on your packet than on the slide, but not really anticipating much of a change to local revenue, a little bit of an increase. Right now that is primarily due to the current predictions for tuition payments. The education spending is showing as a big negative number on this chart. That's a number that we backfill, and that education spending money is the money that we need to go to the state for once you finalize a budget. So that will be likely around the high 18s with this budget, and we will plug it in at the end. Overall, the draft that you see in front of you now is up 1.73%, and that's the first line in that blue section on the bottom. Your local revenue is up a little bit at this point as well. And then the third line there is the use of your prior year fund balance. So that's the money left over from 2 years ago that we bring forward to the budget. Right now, I've got $336,000 in there as a placeholder. That's half of your fund balance, which is was almost $700,000. So this is an area where each year, when we get to that January meeting, you folks decide how much of that you want to ask voters to put forward into a capital reserve fund. This right now is showing half of it going to the capital reserve fund. Last year, you only asked for a quarter to go to the capital reserve fund because we had a larger than normal fund balance, and also some budget pressures or tax rate pressures that we were dealing with. To move this budget by a penny, you need to change your ed spending by $140,000. So you're gonna, if you tell me we only want to move a quarter into capital reserve, that's going to change this tax rate by a penny. So you have a lot of room to move the tax rate based on where we think your year end is going to be for FY25. So a lot there. I will pause. Lynn, I don't know if you want to talk about use of fund balance or building up capital reserves in the face of Act 73 redistricting.
Yeah.
So, one, I always feel like this time of the year, I like to do the word of caution about use of fund balance. It's something we regularly do, and every time we do that, it sets us up in the following year's budget to have to make up what we put in. So it's almost like starting with being overdrawn, because we have to make up that amount before we add anything to our next budget. And that is a little bit, we'll talk later about what we're facing as a state, because the state also uses it as a strategy to put revenue in and buy down, and then it puts us in the hole to begin with. So there's one element of it. According to Act 73, the intention of that law is that we'll be in a merged structure on July 1, 2028. So if any issue as a supervisory union won't exist, we would become a part of a larger district or a larger supervisory union. And Morgan and I both have wonders about that, because everybody is going to come to the table with different resources, both debt resources and revenue resources. So there are pros and cons to putting more money into your capital reserve and using more to drive down your tax rate. So it's a delicate walk, I think, that we need to think about. We need to think about next year's implication, but then we also need to think about what kind of reserve are we going to enter the merge with. And as I said, I just want to put a little caution there. That's the intent of the law, and a lot has to happen in this next legislative session for that to come to fruition. So we're thinking forward and recognizing there's still a lot of uncertainty around that. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, that's exactly the concern. One point before we go on, I would say that this is you asking permission from the voters. So if we put that article on the warning and that article fails, then all of that fund balance money is going to go to buying down tax rates. We've never seen that. I think we've actually passed the capital reserve article and not passed budgets in the past, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's what happens sometimes. And so to get down to the tax rates, we take the budget that you ultimately approve minus any revenue that we're expecting and minus any fund balance that we decide we're going to use. And that comes up with a figure that's called education spending. We then divide that by the count of kids that we use, the long-term weighted ADM, which we'll talk about a little bit. Right here, the draft has 1,575 kids or 1575 ADM. This number has been moving a lot over the last couple of weeks as districts push back on some of the data that the ARE is using. And so I don't think this number is going to drop. It may go up a little in the next few weeks. And a penny on the tax rate. The tax rate will move a penny if you pick up 12 more kids. So it's conceivable that that number could move and move the tax rate
Just want to
significantly.
unpack that for a minute. So you said 1 penny on the tax rate equals how many $100,000?
140,000 in ed spending and 12 kids, or 12 kids.
So there's a pretty significant impact in the long-term weighted ADM losing 67 on the 68
Yeah.
students.
And because of those weights, if you have a kid, and we'll kind of go over this a little bit later, if you have a kid who's also living in poverty, also an ELL student, also at a high school, one kid could be worth 5 kids in terms of ADM. So those numbers can move pretty dramatically with cleaning up the data. So we take education spending, we divide that by the ADM, and we get what's called per pupil ed spending. And this is the number that we use to compare ourselves to other districts across the state. And it's ultimately the number that is used to calculate tax rates. So if you'll speed forward, I think to slide 22. One more. So this is the chart that we show you every year, and we put it in the budget book and try to get it out in front of voters. The bottom blue line, you can see Enosburg-Richford at 11,139. That's the current year per pupil spending. The budget in front of you is just over 12,000, so you would go maybe one line above the other blue line where Northern Mountain Valley is, if nobody else increases their spending. The December 1 letter that's come out, it's pretty clear that a lot of districts, at least in their initial look at their budgets, are anticipating bigger increases in spending than we've got on the table right now. So I think the fear that we always have is we will be going asking for an increase from your voters, knowing that it's a significant tax impact and that we're actually going to lose ground on this chart as we did from 25 to 26. We'll go back to that one, yeah. So we get that 12,000 figure. That's your per pupil ed spending. We then divide that by the yield, which is the number that the legislature ultimately will set, which is basically a math problem and allows them to raise enough money to pay for all the budgets that are passed in the state. The December 1 letter included a yield figure of $8,849. That's the number that we all will use when we present information to your voters. We are all confident that that's not going to be the number that's passed in June, but there won't be a better number between now and March. Lynn was tipping about a penny equaling a lot of ed spending and a small number of kids changing. A $65 change on the yield is going to move your tax rate a penny. So I think we anticipate after these budgets are warned, hopefully after they're passed, the legislature will come in and change that yield amount to the better. They're all going back to their constituents looking for votes this November. They don't want to be seen as responsible for a big tax increase. There are several ways that they can do that. The one that, the tool that they've been using in the past is sort of buying it down with one-time money that they've found in other places. So we anticipate that number will get better, but that number won't get better in time for it to help a budget vote. That brings us to a proposed homestead tax rate of $35.87 right now, or about a 6-cent increase on the tax rate. That number is then impacted by the CLA, and we've gone over that with this group quite a bit in the past. Right now, Enosburg CLA is projected to move pretty dramatically, and so that 6-cent increase on the district-wide tax rate is going to feel like a 27-cent increase in Enosburg. In Richford, the number's moving in the opposite direction, so that 6-cent increase in the district tax rate is likely to only feel like a 3-cent increase in Richford. Property is moving in Enosburg in terms of fair market value a lot faster there than it is across the state as a whole. In Richford, it's not moving as fast as it is compared to the rest of the state as a whole. That puts you in a pretty weird position as a board because if we make changes and we drive down the tax rate, or the state makes changes, data changes, and that drives down the tax rate, it's impacting those two towns very differently. And I don't think I have a lot of advice on how to deal with that, other than we're going to try to be as transparent to your voters as possible about what parts of this budget you all control and what parts of this budget are really at the whim of the funding formula.
I think this is actually, it's interesting in an unfortunate way, because I think it is a perfect demonstration about how, this is one budget that we're talking about, and we're the same. We're at 6-cent increase before you apply CLA. So 6-cent increase, I think historically we would feel okay about moving forward with something within that range. But the CLA impact is so dramatically felt when you look at the difference in property valuations between the two communities. It's just stark. So hopefully that'll help us maybe communicate about the, how, when there's variation really at all with the CLA, the dramatic impact that has on tax rates in a community.
But it's a lot more complicated than that, because Richford just reappraised a couple of years ago, and even though the tax rate didn't go up, people feel that it's related to the school because their taxes increased significantly. So even, I think Enosburg's due for a reappraisal, is that true? Yeah. And so even if they reappraised and the tax rate didn't go up, they would still be hit hard.
I totally get that. I think
a lot of people don't understand
I know.
it.
The bottom line is just like, even though we could show the year that Richford reappraised,
right,
your tax rate tamed down to like
exactly
86 cents, but it felt like more because their properties were, they were putting them where they thought the fair market value is. But if you look at the, do you want to explain anything about the 136% and what that's reflecting in Richford?
Yeah, we'll get into the CLA a little bit.
Sorry, I jumped out of you.
No, not at all. And so you will have this, again, it's another attachment in what I sent to you earlier today. These numbers will change, but we need to be prepared because of the CLA for our discussions in Enosburg. And even with that 6-cent increase, you've got Richford sitting at a tax rate under $1, and they've historically, the last couple of years, have been almost at the bottom of the state, because once they reappraised, they were toward the bottom of the state in terms of tax rates.
They were the second lowest in the state.
These slides have not changed much, so we can go through this one and the next one and the next one pretty quickly. They will be in the information that we send out to your voters and have on our website. This one as well, you've gone over that in the past. The numbers are changing a little bit because I'm trying to use the most accurate projections from the AOE, but the overall message does not change. About a quarter of the ed fund is homestead property tax, even though that's the only part of the ed fund that people care about. And we are spending more money than we're raising in our two towns. This has not changed from last year. It's the first time you're seeing it this go around, and it just walks people through on a high level on how those tax rates are calculated. So spending divided by students, divided by the yield gives you your district tax rate. Again, the spending plan is the only part that you, the board, control. The students are what the students are, and the yield will be determined by the legislature likely in June this year. These numbers have not been updated, so that the ones you had from last year, but I just wanted to walk you through it again. We weight students based on different categories in Vermont because the legislature has determined that some kids are more expensive to educate than the others. So on this one, you can see that last year we started with an average daily membership. So these are all the kids in your schools that you're responsible for of 863. But we ended up with twice that number when we were calculating the tax rates. In our communities up here, we see a big increase in the count due to students living in poverty. Everybody across the state gets a bump up for middle school and high school and English language learners. You also saw a bump because of our relatively sparse population. You get to count kids a little bit more due to that. The poverty numbers have changed a lot from last year to this year, and that's really the area where a lot of the districts are pushing back and trying to make sure that all the kids are being counted because you get a bonus for those because you get to count them more. That's one area where we might get a lucky break in terms of that 1,500 people count that we're starting out with. Any questions on all of that? No. And we can certainly pop back at any point. We covered this. Again, this is current year spending, but we certainly don't anticipate that we're going to be drifting up in the next year. Common level of appraisal, you didn't see this last month, but these numbers are the same from last year, and we may tweak them. And again, if anyone's listening, the common level of appraisal is the state looking at the town grand lists and seeing how accurate they are, and their desire that a house that's appraised for $100,000 in Enosburg is taxed fairly compared to a house appraised for $100,000 in Richford. And again, because Richford just went through a reappraisal and Enosburg has not gone through a reappraisal in a long time, and because of Enosburg's recent increase in what houses are going for, the state knows that that $100,000 house in Enosburg is maybe really worth $200,000 on the open market. And that $100,000 house in Richford on the open market is now worth $90,000 because of how much the reappraisal that they went through has moved those property values. And so the CLA is just a hard to explain way for the state to equalize those properties so that people are paying based on fair market value. This is what the tax rate chart is looking at now. So again, if you think of where we were in FY26 compared to the proposed tax rate for FY27, a small increase in Richford, but a huge increase in Enosburg. So just a graphic representation of what that CLA does once you get down to the town level. This chart you saw last year, and this will show what the anticipated dollar changes for properties of different values in the two towns. So that the two charts in green and red on the right is for people who are paying just based on their property value. The two charts on the left is for people who are paying based on their income. I don't have all the data yet to update the income side, so those numbers will change once the tax department releases the updated tax credit information. But if last year's any indication, this will be ready to be live by the time we need to go to print. We talked about capital reserve funds last month, so I don't need to spend any time on that. I have included in your packet a draft of the warning. Just a reminder that Mort, Akua, and Devon are up for election. The petitions for those seats are due by January 26th, either to me or to Billy Joe. If you send them to me, I'll get them to her. And that's required to appear on the ballot. We will update Article 4, which is the spending once you finalize the budget. And then Article 5 is a placeholder now, and that's for that that authority to move a certain amount of the capital, out of a certain amount of the fund balance into the capital reserve fund. And I think that's it for that speed round. I'm happy to go back to anything, and answer any questions.
Anybody else? No, I think we're all set.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that's all I have for you tonight.
Okay. All right. Lynn?
Okay, so I'm going to start with the personnel report. Wait for Courtney to caught up there.
There it is. Sorry, I could not find it.
It's okay. So in terms of the personnel report, we have one action item. I'm happy to report that we found a nurse, Alyssa Ryan, for Enosburg Elementary School. She actually began yesterday. So ask the board to make a motion to approve Alyssa Ryan.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Sarah made a motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm an aye.
The rest of that hiring section is informational. Sorry, I'm just going to take notes while we do this. There's nothing under resignations that requires action, but I do just want to note that the LEAP site coordinator for Richford Elementary School, Carrie Ross, who has been there for 15 years, has tendered her resignation. She's going to work through December 23rd. And then I know Kelly and Heather are working closely to try to find someone to take her place. So you also have Katie West. She's a kitchen assistant that has resigned. Was she at your school, Beth? Katie West?
Mine.
The elementary school. So effective December 12th. We still have some open positions there. Some of them have been filled since this was posted. So any principals, I'll just ask you to look at that list. Is there anything that's changed? Beth, have you filled some of the, or no, Anthony, have you filled any of the athletic positions?
Not any of those
Not on
yet.
this list, no. So we're still looking for a paraeducator at Enosburg Elementary, Enosburg Middle School. We'd love to find a literacy interventionist, a middle school baseball coach. Enosburg High School guidance director position remains open. We're looking for a JV baseball, a paraeducator, varsity boys soccer, and varsity girls soccer coaches. Richford Elementary School, we're on the hunt for a LEAP site coordinator. And Richford Junior Senior High School is looking for a paraeducator. In terms of personnel report, the next section is on retirements. So every year by December 1st, it's written in the collective bargaining agreement that people intending to retire in the following year should notify us of their intent to retire. So longtime teacher Jennifer Carpenter, grade 3, she has looped, is it 2-3 or 3? 2-3 for a long time. It's over 30 years. Jen has submitted her resignation with an effective date June 30th, 26. She'll be retiring at that time. So I'd ask the board to make a motion to accept Jen Carpenter's retirement notice.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Rachel made a motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm an aye.
Also informational, Madeline Weatherby, a longtime paraeducator. I don't have a sense of how many years. Do you have a sense?
I don't know, I think 30.
A long time. She's going to be also retiring at the end of this school year. So both have made incredible contributions to our community, so we appreciate them and wish them well. Also, in your collective bargaining agreement, teachers who expect to make a salary advancement have to let us know that by December 1. So Cold Hollow has a couple of moves. You'll see, I won't go person by person, but you can see that what we have laid out for each of the column movements, there are a lot of them, and some of them are doubles. So you can see Enosburg Elementary's first one is a double move, like from an M to an M30. So what that means is they'll go down a step and then they'll go over 2 steps. So there's an impact. Enosburg Middle School has 2 doubles. And then we have a double at Enosburg High School and one at Richford Elementary School. And then one big jump. I think it's a triple at Beth's school. So people have been doing a lot of work, a lot of professional learning happening, and we see some movement that'll happen in contracts next year. Any questions about any of that? All right, it is that time of the board meeting. We're going to just ask the principals if they recognize their school and they'd like to say a couple of words about what we are seeing up there. Feel free to jump in.
I'll start on the top left corner. That is pre-tech. They just learned some art, some design concepts, and making wreaths. And then they sold their wreaths at the...
I got mine on Saturday.
Oh, hopefully it holds up. I'm just kidding, I'm sure it will. They sold them on Saturday. They were in the parade Saturday night, so that was their unit last week.
Had a great float in the parade on Saturday.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did a good job.
So Richford Junior Senior High School is the top right, and on the bus, they were coming back from Choose a Major Day or Try a Major Day at Vermont State University Linden campus.
The top middle is Enosburg, one of our senior fundraisers that they just had. I haven't gotten the actual results yet, but what I was told was while they weren't as busy as normal, they still made quite a bit of money. So
Awesome.
it was a successful fundraiser.
I'm assuming this was at the craft fair this weekend.
Yeah.
So that would leave the bottom 2 for mine and Jen's, and neither one of us can see. So, there you have it.
So Kelly, you are the bottom left,
Okay.
and that was your pre-KK Family Friday.
Okay.
Was this posted on Facebook?
Yeah, of course they were. Jen,
Not recognize the room.
that was your kindergartners food.
Food shop.
Food shelf.
Food shelf.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
I took that from a slideshow. It was nice. Okay.
Anything either of you want to add about those events?
I was going to mention the pre-K, well, I'll just say it now. So this is our second year of doing the pre-KK Family Fridays, and it has been a huge success. We do a survey every time we get feedback from families. This year we added on another piece after that, and that is open to families, to anybody, any of the families in the school. And it's really an informational piece. And this last month, we had NCSS that came and visited and provided some information to families around, what was the topic? Creatively creating routines and structures. And the responses, there were 12 people that attended, 12 families that attended, beyond the pre-KK piece. And the survey results, the comments in the survey results were great. It really hit the mark in terms of what we're trying to do for families. Like many people said, like, this provided some resources that we've never had. This was a resource that I didn't know existed. you know, and was able to connect with, and then also cited NCSS working with us in the school, and that was a real positive thing. So, yeah, they've been a real success.
And our kiddos are working on community service in all the grade levels. And so kindergarten had raised getting some cans and food for the food shelf, and then they got to deliver it, and they were so excited.
Awesome. Thank you for playing along, principals. We'll see what pictures we get for next month.
It's a mystery.
So this month, when we were at the SU board meeting, question came up about comparison data and looking at what does our data look like in comparison to the rest of the state. So I've put it together by district, by SU, and by state. So you can see when you put the all your third graders in your ER schools together, the blue reflects their proficiency level. The red reflects when we put all of our 9 schools together. In the SU, that's our proficiency level, and the yellow indicates the state level proficiency level. So this gives you some sense looking at it where we're close to the state proficiency level, either in this district or as an SU in general. There are some areas that, you know, we're excited to see the growth, particularly at 3rd grade, and 9th grade is reflecting that we're very close to the state proficiency level as well. I'm going to dig in a little more at each of those grade levels when we move on to the next slide. Does that slide make sense to you?
It is.
So this is taking a look at the VT cap. So this is the assessment that was taken last spring. That's what I was just showing you, but this is by school. So you can look at the performance levels by school. Level 4 would be exceeding the standard, that's blue. Achieving the standard, level 3 is green. Approaching the standard, level 2 is yellow. And red is significantly below the standard. So I've broken this data down by grade level, not by grade level, by school in this chart. So you can see there's more data behind this where we really can unpack what is VT cap showing this year and how has it grown over time. And we're seeing some of our schools making some good significant growth. So we're pleased with that growth. We're not where we want to be in terms of overall outcome, but we are pleased with the growth trends that we're seeing in our schools and in our system as a whole. So something that really stands out here, Richford High School has shifted a significant number of kids into proficiency there, and we also saw some positive growth in other schools as well, but I think that's the one that really stands out when you're looking at this chart. And the other piece I'll just say is that it's important that we're looking at achievement, you know, reaching the standard and exceeding the standard, but it's also important when we look over time, we're trying to shrink the number of students that are in the bottom 2 proficiency levels. So we have a lot of students that might not be at proficient yet, but they're growing. And they might have moved from the red into the yellow, or they might have had a significant gain but didn't quite make it to the next performance level. So this is a work in progress, and we'll continue to look at it through a variety of lenses. So one of the things when I did this work with the NMV board for their board meeting, I was looking at, you know, we take the VT cap assessment in the spring. We also take the STAR literacy assessment in the spring. And I put the state benchmark results for the STAR literacy side by side with the VT cap. There was a stronger correlation, I will say, on the NMV side about how their scores compared as a predictor for success in the VT cap assessment. There is some correlation here. So what we think is that students who are proficient when they take the STAR literacy spring assessment or are likely to be proficient in the VT cap assessment. And it's not true of all schools, but it is true of several schools when I compared it. So you can look at this later, and you can go back to, if you go back one, Courtney, if you look at where they were on the VT cap literacy, and then if you flip to the next one, you can look at the same period of time, how did they do on the STAR literacy using the state benchmark data, and there is some correlation there. I also looked at, now that we're into the 25-26 school year, I looked by school to break down where are we with the fall assessment data, and that we do often see a dip when it comes to the fall assessment data, and I would predict that we will see some pretty good growth moving into that winter benchmark, which I think opens the month of January. So we'll be able to report out on that later this year. I'll shift to math. So this is VTCAP comparison data. Again, blue is ER, red is FNESU, and yellow is Vermont. We have seen some solid growth. We're particularly pleased with the growth that we're seeing in some of our lower grades in particular. I think third grade math for us really was a point of pride. Our students are, I think, 9% over what the statewide average is in that ninth grade data across the supervisory union. And you can see the comparisons are within a few percentage points in several of the cases. We have a couple of outliers. Sixth grade and seventh grade are more outliers in terms of that comparison data, and eighth. So we'll continue to work on that piece.
I just want to say, those kids were in first and second grade when our schools shut down, and it's very obvious that there's foundational skills missing that we're trying to backfill now, and many of our parents were working, and they weren't able to get the help, because people weren't at home.
Right.
So I do feel that might be the reason for the dip in sixth and seventh grade.
That's a good point, yeah. So the VTCAP math by school data is there for you to take a look at. And we have been looking school-wise, principals have been looking at what does their data look like over a several year. I think we have 5 years now. Is it 5 years? 5 years of VTCAP data. So you can look at that trend over time of both the VTCAP data and the STAR assessment data. So the next slide is spring STAR assessment for math. And again, I looked at this and I kept going back and forth between, is this an indicator of proficiency in the VTCAP? And there's some correlation. It's not a direct correlation, but there is some correlation in terms of prediction. Kelly, I don't know why I have the gray bar there. I tried to ask Leah. There might be a problem. I don't know why it says no target with that data. I think the percentages look right, but I will get back to the board if that's an error on my part. I don't know what the gray means. I also looked at where we scored in terms of fall assessment data, and again, we expect to see the dip in the fall, and we did see the dip in the fall. We'll bring this back and I'll be able to give you the side-by-side comparison when I come back, most likely at your February meeting. So we'll be able to take this data and put it side-by-side with where our students scoring now in the mid-year assessment. Any questions on any of the data? Okay. So I'm going to jump into a conversation about Act 73 and a school redistricting discussion. So I let you know in your board notes that there is a meeting that's being held this Thursday, December 11th, in St. Albans at the Hardeck Lodge at 6 o'clock. The hope is that board members can attend. I know you have a conflict on that night.
Yep.
Perfect. So Sarah's going to be there as the vice chair. Sarah's going to present some information based on our conversation that we're going to have tonight. So Courtney is positioned to take some notes. We had a board retreat recently where the board did some learning and tried to put some thoughts down related to this work. So we have that to build from for the conversation tonight. So the hope tonight is that we can talk about some of the options that have been considered for governance mergers in the region. And we're going to use this discussion to prepare for that regional meeting. And I'll just own, there was a survey that was sent to board chairs, and we missed it this fall. Then their board feedback went on to the VSBA. So we went back retroactively, and that's what guided the board retreat that we had last week to look at those same questions. So the way other districts may be talking about this may be in the context of how they completed the survey. So I just want to name, we didn't do the survey. I let VSBA know we didn't do the survey. We all missed the notice about the survey. So, but we've still done the work. We've been talking about Act 73, we've been learning about it every month. So we're just going to talk a little more deeply tonight. So key areas that we're going to focus on tonight will include reviewing quickly what we know about Act 73 and redistricting work. We want to have a conversation about potential opportunities of mergers within a larger system and identify potential risks and or concerns with mergers into a larger system. We want to identify positive impacts of a foundation formula and negative impacts of a foundation formula. We want to talk about some potential partnerships with other districts and some of the configurations that have already been considered. And then, a little typo there, discuss whether or not this board, ER, wants to take a formal position. I am not advocating for that. I think it will, Sarah will be in the position where she'll be asked to discuss how our conversations have gone around Act 73. So I actually will go back one to that conversation that's happening on Thursday. I didn't really lay that all out. So at that meeting in St. Albans will be all of the school systems in Franklin County. So I'm not, Grand Isle was not on the list, was it?
No.
So it will be Franklin Northeast, our two districts, Missisquoi Valley, Maple Run, and Franklin West. So it will be the boards of those districts, plus their superintendents, plus all of the local legislators have been invited. So this will be a conversation where the boards have the opportunity to talk about how these conversations have gone, and then the legislators can say some things, they can ask questions, they can talk, and then there'll be public comment at the end of the meeting.
Do you want me to share the agenda? I have it up if you want me to.
Can you just read the order of the agenda?
Yep. So Paul Costello is the facilitator, so he'll be introduced. And then each board will have 10 minutes to present their discussions and positions regarding Act 73. So
That's an outer max, I just want to say to
Yeah.
10 minutes, Sarah.
it's no more than 10 minutes, but it doesn't mean you have to stand and deliver for 10 full minutes.
minimum minutes. So it's actually going alphabetically.
I wasn't going to share that part with her, because we haven't had our pre-meet yet. We're doing that tomorrow night.
Well, I said 9 minutes.
Okay. You get to go first.
Yeah. And then
Sorry.
after that,
You got it.
there's a open dialogue and discussion with the legislative delegation of school board members, and then they're going to open it up for public comment for 2 minutes per person.
Okay. So
They all gotta fit there.
I've not been in lodge.
It's not very large.
So are we talking the lodges in where the pool is?
No, it's like at
Same
the
area.
base of the hill. There's like a pretty, like, it's got like a fireplace and a little
Chalet.
lobby area.
At Hardak meeting?
Yeah, it's where
It's
the
kind of
pool
like
is, but
behind
it's just
that
a
pool area.
Yeah, it's.
That's not really
It
nice.
used to
I
be
know.
an old heating shack, and now it's nice.
Okay. They've done a really good job of it.
It just doesn't look very big.
It's not, that's why I was asking.
So I'm setting the stage for you for the conversation that's going to come next, because I'm going to now just, I'm going to reactivate your prior knowledge, because we've gone over a lot this fall, and then I'm going to ask you to do some thinking. So we know there was a task force that was assigned through Act 73 to come together and make a recommendation to the legislators. They were tasked with coming up with between 1 and 3 maps that they could present back to the legislators. The intent, from my understanding, was those maps were supposed to reflect merged systems to take us from where we are now in terms of 57-ish districts and supervisory unions or supervisory districts and 119 districts down to a much smaller number. So we talked about last month that that's not actually what the task force voted to do. So instead of proposing a map that reflected merged systems, they proposed regions of the state, and that's a familiar map that represents the current superintendent groups across the state. So the green is where we would be, that's the Champlain Valley, and that's from Richford to Moncton, all of Franklin, all of Grand Isle, all of Chittenden, and 2/3 of Addison counties. What this is reflecting is they want these 5 regions to work in a cooperative education service area. So the idea is that you would create, in other states it's called a BOCES, and you would work to identify efficiencies that you could do by managing some of your resources together. So things like special education, transportation, food service, specialized contracts, alternative programs, things like that. So the idea would be instead of everybody doing it separately, you would work on those things together. In their proposal, which if you go back to the opening slide of this section, there is a final report that was released early last week, and I linked that on the first slide that has the picture of the puzzle pieces. It's there. So if you want to look at it later, you're welcome to. So they proposed this BOCES-like model, and they also, I'm going to go to the next slide, Courtney, made a recommendation that they really like the idea of building comprehensive high schools, but they want that to be done through voluntary conversations with existing districts. So they're not saying no to mergers, they're saying this shouldn't be done to districts, it should be something that districts do voluntarily with one another. So this was a proposal we've talked about in recent months that is started out as each of those different colored areas on those maps would have reflected a merged district, and they would have been centered around 20 comprehensive high schools around the state. For Franklin County, the comprehensive high schools that were reflected there were in Maple Run and in Enosburg. So BFA St. Albans and Enosburg. There was a note at the very bottom on the map on the right side that possible additional locations could include Missisquoi. It was identified as a potential third. It was never clear if these would be the only high schools, but it was clear in their work that their intention was to try to build larger high schools that could offer more opportunities for students by doing it through the lens of a comprehensive high school. I think there's also what's built into this is that idea of CTE centers being connected to these larger comprehensive high schools. Morgan, anything you want to add there? Another map that they spent a lot of time, actually, I forgot to say one thing. Could you go back a map? So there were 2 versions of the comprehensive high schools map that were in the original proposal. The one on the left was comprehensive high schools with those traditional historic academies. So the private schools that we have 4, and I don't know if I can name all 4, St. Johnsbury, Burton, Linden Institute, and Thetford Academy. So that map included the traditional high schools. The map on the right-hand side was a reflection of only public high schools on that map. So another map that they spent a lot of time talking about in the redistricting task force was a map that reflected mergers connected to CTE centers. So that our area, that yellow, would have reflected us merged with all of Franklin County, and it would have taken, right now we're our own tech center district, and it would have merged our Cold Hollow Tech Center with the Northwest Tech Center at Maple Run. So that would have been under this map, that would have been where we would be positioned. This map was not approved by the task force, and I'll tell you from my perspective why. This map reflects 7 school districts, so our supervisory districts, we would have been a district. So what that means is no students in our district would have had a high school choice outside of that district, okay? There are 7 other parts of the state that would have been structured as a supervisory union. And when you listen to the conversation that the task force had, where those supervisory unions were geographically located were really tied to where those historic academies and private schools were. So there was some discontent over opening up larger choice, more money coming away from public schools towards the private academies. So some of those, if you look, especially if you look at the northeast region of Vermont, geographically that's an enormous supervisory union in this map. So ultimately they voted this map down. However, we're about to go into a legislative session, and one of the authors of this map is Scott Beck, who is a senator who works at St. John's Berry Academy, and he sits on the Senate Finance Committee. Last year when all of this was happening related to Act 73, when we got right down to the end of the legislative session, there were those conference committees that had to come together, and you had Scott Beck and Seth Bongartz were representing the 2 of the 3 senators that were represented, and Seth Bongartz chairs Senate Education Committee. So as we go into this legislative session, my instinct is we will see this map come back up and try to work its way through the legislative body. So ways that we have seen people talk about our systems, our districts, is we've seen proposals that take Franklin Northeast and MVU and Alberg, that's the one on the left, that would bring us to just over 4,000 students, almost 4,100. And if you remember right, in Act 73, they asked them to consider districts or supervisory unions between 4,000 and 8,000 students. Another way that we have seen them reflect ideas around merger, it was taking all of Franklin County and Alberg. The most recent map that we saw had Alberg teased back out and kept with the other islands. There were some versions of the map that took Franklin West and broke them apart and put part of them in another district. So by looking at Franklin County and Alberg, that gets us to just over 8,000. So just some context about what that task force spoke about. Any questions on that? I won't go through all of the next slide, but I just want to remind you that we're sitting in a position where we're a supervisory union. We have our FNASU board, and then we have 2 district boards. And the reason that we have 2 district boards is when Act 46 happened, the question came up about could we become a district? In order to do that, we would have had to have had like structures. So those schools on the NMV side would have had to have given up their school choice, because in order to be a district, you can't pay tuition out to another system. So our voters chose to remain in a supervisory union. So there are some challenges to the supervisory union structure, and we've outlined all of those in a previous meeting. So this is all here for you to look at. Some of the big things that I will say is that in an SU there are multiple boards that are working, and sometimes their clarity of the roles and the purpose of the boards is a little tricky because each board has a different responsibility. So the SU board responsibility versus the district board responsibility is different. In the SDs and the supervisory districts, you've got one governing board that's responsible for all of it. There's some funding implications in here. We have to create 3 separate budgets this time of the year. In an SD, they create one main budget. We have multiple audits. We have 3 audits that we do every year. In an SD, you have one. I will tell you, there's one system in the state that I think has 17 audits that they have to contend with because they have that many districts that they have within their system. One of the drawbacks of a supervisory union is that we can't actually own property. As a supervisory union, only the districts can own property, so we don't own our central office and we don't own the buildings that our alternative programs sit in because we are not allowed to own. We also, as an SU, do not have borrowing authority where districts do. So that is something that we could work it out if we needed to, but it is a tricky barrier that we have. Payroll is another complexity in a supervisory union. We run multiple payrolls. We have done the work to make sure that our CDA is aligned, and a lot of the work that we do in our system is fully aligned across the SU. Any questions or comments just about the governance structure?
Can I ask one? Is there no talk of like changing some of the statutes around what supervisors and districts can and can't do, or is that off the table?
I don't think anything's off the table.
I'm just wondering if they've talked about like changing some of those handcuffs, but I don't know. I haven't heard them talk about it.
Yeah, we've been asking for that for a lot of years, and it doesn't get any play.
Okay.
The interesting part, you want to say the thing about the BOCES that we discovered?
So they have in Vermont created BOCES, which stands for Board of Cooperative Educational Services. It's a structure that has worked well in other states. In New York, for example, tech centers are under a BOCES, and a lot of special ed is under a BOCES, and they have individual districts. In Vermont, the BOCES kind of looks like another version of the supervisory union. Each of those member districts is going to send somebody there to a board. That board is going to operate as a separate board, run a separate organization underneath it. Separate superintendent, or someone looks like a superintendent, separate business manager, their own staff. When they wrote that law, they allowed BOCES to borrow money and allowed BOCES to own buildings. And so that tells me that we're not going to get it as a supervisory union because they could have just done that at that point.
So I don't know how much time we spent in this board talking about this slide, but do you remember this slide?
Oh, yeah.
So I'll just talk about it at a high level. So we have the 2 separate districts. If you go over to the far left, and you can see how they're broken apart, you have a larger box on the top that reflects the Northern Mountain Valley district. On the bottom, the darker purple reflects ER. I'll talk about Northern Mountain Valley for just a second. If you track that over the vertical line, that lighter purple line, the top band that goes across the top reflects the students that they educate. Those are the elementary students, the pre-K 8 elementary students. That band that turns into orange reflects the students that they pay tuition for. So those are the high school students. So if we track that band down, you can see the first part on the top where Morgan's blue circle is. That reflects the number of students within an MV that choose either Enosburg or Richford high schools. So the majority of the students in NMV are choosing to stay in our supervisory union. The next band, it's smaller right there, reflects the number of students who are attending other public high schools in Franklin County, okay? So if we think about this larger merger conversation, if we were put into a district that included other high schools in the county, there would likely be some choice elements for the other high schools in that system. So if you put those 2 bands together, those that stay in FNESU and those that are attending other Franklin County high schools, that's the majority of students that NMV is paying tuition for. There are 2 thin bands that come off that, and the first is other public high schools outside of the county. The second is students that were paying tuition to attend private school somewhere. So these numbers are significantly smaller. Both of those are significantly smaller. So the decision of us being in a supervisory union is really, when you think about it, in the very bottom band, in my opinion, because there's another way that you can get to choice. If you are a Montgomery student and you want to attend South Burlington and your parent lives there, you can apply through Universal High School Choice. So, sorry, that's if you live in Enosburg-Richford. So even if students didn't have high school choice outside of FNESU or Franklin County, if we were in a larger merged structure, they still have a pathway, if that remains after all of this, to get there. But the one piece that would go away would be that small band of students that right now have choice to go to a private academy. Enosburg and Richford, your bands really reflect, the larger band are your elementary students, and the band that turns into blue, those are your high school students that don't have choice, they don't have like tuition dollars that they can take somewhere. Those are students that can access choice through Universal High School Choice, but generally stay in our schools. Any questions on the choice piece? So let's move into the discussion part, because that's really the crux of the background that we've talked about. So I think it's tempting to jump to negatives, and I'm on purpose going to ask you not to do that. I want us to think about, if we were creating a new structure and it was larger than the structure that we currently have, are there opportunities or outcomes that you might see as positive within a larger system? And Courtney's going to capture our thinking, because that's going to help Sarah on Thursday.
Would cost effectiveness be one thing? Being a larger, you could share resources.
Some resources. I wonder if the scale piece is, when you're a little larger, if the scale piece has a positive impact on the funding. I think, I'm just going to name it. So when I think about the opportunities that we can offer compared to other systems regionally nearby, there's a discrepancy between what we're able to afford to offer, what our taxpayers will approve in our spending plans, and some other systems nearby. So I think when it comes to student opportunities, there would be more opportunities that you could offer to students in a larger system.
You're talking like college classes?
Could be college classes.
Could be the classes offered.
Theater programs, it could be, experiences. We've got a difference, there's a significant difference between our per pupil, our weighted per pupil spending when we're thinking about our regional partners. So when you think about coming together, you're not going to build a system that advantages one group of students over another. You're going to try to build a system that has more equitable opportunities across the board.
I think especially coming from our district as well, because we're so used to having to figure it out, or have principals that are, very well versed in splitting positions and teachers and resources. So kind of being able to distribute that and see that be positive.
One data point I will share that I've shared with the SU board often is around teacher retention data. So we have had years where we've had around 30% of our teachers who've been either emergency or originally licensed, and a lot of times we lose those teachers to Maple Run because that system pays more than we do. So if we were merged into, and I know there's a counter to this, but I'm just talking about the positive part for student opportunities. If our salary across the county was the same. To be able to retain our teachers for longer. And that has a profoundly positive impact on students. The quality of the teacher that's in front of them is the strongest indicator of success for students. Any other positives or opportunities? Okay. How about risks or negative outcomes within a larger system?
I think you're gonna have more kids, you have more behavioral issues, so you're gonna need more behavioral technicians. So I think it's a bigger cost here with behavioral issues.
You're saying if they all go to one school?
Yeah, right.
I think rural Vermont is a big problem too, just like where kids that live out in the middle of nowhere and getting them to those schools, that
Transportation.
and transportation,
Yeah.
traveling, definitely a huge concern.
So one piece of this is right now we're talking about the districts merging. This plan isn't about school closures. They are talking, that's something that down the road, they'll have to work out, like if there's a scale piece that they've got to figure out. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, that is something that will happen down the road, is they'll have to look at how many schools you're operating across the state as a whole. But right now, what we're talking about is merging the governance structure, so the merge of the governance structure wouldn't necessarily move where students are attending.
But if you're looking at sharing resources and opportunities, you may have to have someone be transported to BFA or wherever the opportunity is.
That would be increasing choice, right? That would just.
Within the county, potentially?
Right.
I think one of the other opportunities would be more cohesiveness around curriculum. I think of kids who are moving from one district to another, especially now that we've gone as deep as we have with getting away from Carnegie and towards proficiency-based learning. The transition for those kids going from one school to another is a lot easier if the curriculum is unified.
That'll be a tricky piece to it though, because then you got to decide whose curriculum are you going to use, and the costs there change.
Similar to what we had to do with Act 46, when we onboarded Sheldon.
Yeah.
Any other risks? I'll say from the NMB side, it came up about loss of choice potentially in a larger system, because it would be a different kind of choice. It wouldn't be it's not a voucher, but it is taking the tuition dollars to another place.
And from this district, it would be kind of opening up that choice potentially, or no?
What's that?
I said in our district, would it be opening up that choice for us, not per se?
Not
It
for
would be
the rest.
limiting like to St. J.
What's that?
It would be limiting it so they couldn't do like to St. J. like
Right, correct.
That type of thing. It'd be just in our area.
Most likely it would be choice within whatever district.
District, right. Whatever,
Level
yeah.
you are at.
It would open it up for elementary to more schools.
Say that again?
It would open it up to elementary kids greater than it is now, because it's hard moving kids across that district boundary even within RSU.
Right. And that is something that comes up all the time, is the students can only transfer and access our elementary school choice within the district that they reside in. So they can't, if you live in Bakersfield, you can't transfer to Enosburg, right? But it would open up more of that.
Can I ask a question about this then too? If they're not talking about, and I know school closures or, merging could be down the road, but if we're talking about just the governance and the funding and how we're doing it, I'm curious the thought process on how you're gonna say a student at BFA, the per pupil cost is gonna be the same as a student here at Enosburg, but not changing anything other than the governance. I'm trying to
Well, you're not changing the, in this first step,
Yeah.
they're only talking about governance, but I didn't say that you wouldn't be changing anything because the next part we're gonna talk about is the foundation formula.
Okay.
And there will be changes on both ends of the continuum to be
Okay.
able to get to a foundation formula.
Okay.
Do we wanna shift to that? And we can always flip back and add more risks or opportunities.
With a district, especially with the elementary schools that have choice, would there be a cap on that? Have they discussed that?
Well,
Especially
all of that
smaller
would be determined by that new board.
Yeah, I'm just
Whenever-
thinking like Montgomery's got, they don't have a lot of children, so, you start taking out a lot of, like a first grade that has like maybe 10 kids.
I mean, we chose to put a cap in our policy, that if there was room,
If
then
I'm
you're
looking
able
at
to.
their level, are they gonna put a cap at their level, or has that been
No,
discussed?
I would, it's not been discussed, there's no board yet. So whoever that new governance structure includes, right, you'd have board members that would get elected to that board, and they'd have to work through all of those policy decisions. In theory, it would open it up for choice just within what your new structure is, if you're a district.
And this board they're talking about, right, these board members, it's held to that professional level of like it's a full-time job, they are expected to, no?
No,
That's
that
not
was
true.
in the governor's plan.
Okay.
So when the governor was talking about the 5-district model, he talked about quasi-professional positions. I didn't get the impression that it was full-time, but it was,
Okay.
it was a funded, because not
Okay.
like the $1,200 you all get each year for this work. So that isn't a part, but right now there really isn't anything
Set
other
plan.
than the governance. Like, we haven't seen anything really about the board elements of it. Before they get into positives and negatives of foundation formula, can you give them a one-on-one on what that foundation formula does?
Sure. So in Vermont, we don't have a per pupil funding formula or per pupil funding system. You guys warn a budget, voters pass it, and then the state figures out what your tax rate is. What they're considering moving to is what probably 48 other states have, where the state says you're getting 15,000 per weighted kid, figure it out, and then you work together to figure it out. If you decide you need more money than that, there's often a mechanism for you to go to voters and ask for additional money. It will be a long, long time before we would ever get to that point up here because we are so
Right,
low
sure.
spending. The reality is that we would be entering this process in September, October, November, knowing what the number was, and it would be how do we want to allocate those resources. Conversely, the voters would not vote on that budget because we would not be asking to spend more money. So there would be some sort of process where we're, seeking community input on how we spend it, pushing that information out, but not the traditional town meeting day where we're all staying up all night trying to get each town's results to know if we have to do this again or not.
So there won't be a vote.
There would not be a vote if you are not asking
More.
to spend more than you're allocated.
But then I'm like thinking of like our neighboring school, like Maple Run, could very well turn into needing to ask their voters for more money, correct? If that amount
It would
is
be
going
a
to be.
district by district, not school by school. So if
Okay.
we're with Maple Run, we would get 15,000, whatever the number is, for all the kids in that countywide district. And then that board would be tasked with saying, okay, EFA St. Albans School is going to get this much money to spend in their building. Enosburg's going to get this much money to spend in their building. Richford's going to get this much money to spend in their building. And that board will have to figure out how to divvy that pie.
But I think I get what you're saying.
I'm just saying, like, they
Yeah.
spend drastically more than we do. So how is that going to roll out? Like,
So that's exactly
Yeah.
the crux of
Right.
this, is that that's where you get into this, there's both positives,
Yeah.
but like a foundation formula for us, if you were thinking of it through the lens of student opportunities, would be profoundly positive.
Yeah.
Because we would be able to offer things we've never been able to offer to our students. There are some negative counters to that, right? So I have colleagues in other parts of the state that are not super excited about the foundation formula because their spending might be $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 per student more than what that is. So if nothing changed with governance structure, like if we just think of it in its simplest term, the way we currently operate, they would have to come down to that without the ability to increase more. So they'd have to be looking at a deficit mindset in terms of opportunities. That's the reality we live in every single year.
Oh, I
I'm gonna be
completely
honest
agree
with you,
with you.
because as we do this, right, we look at, oof, this is the tax rate, and then we immediately go into conversations of what can we cut? And so we're not looking at creating opportunities, we are often positioned to reduce opportunities, and the tide flips this in a foundation formula. So there could be some really positive impacts for students. This would not be a positive impact for taxpayers. So for our taxpayers. So when you think about where we are, we just had this conversation about how our tax rates compare to the rest of the state. There would be an equalization of those tax rates. So in order for us to get to that equalized place with tax rates, our taxpayers are going to see an increase in their tax rates in order to get there. So we would see higher tax rates, way more opportunities for students. Systems that are higher spending right now would likely, in simplest terms, see fewer opportunities for students, and their taxpayers would see less of a tax rate. They'd see decreases there because we're all trying to get to a middle place. Do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's exactly it. And we don't know how high up our tax rate will need to go because we don't know what the spending decisions are going to be at those districts that are used to spending well over that 15,000 figure. If they are able to bring their spending down, or if the penalty for going over that is such that it's driving a lot of money into the ed fund, the impact will be less than if they don't do that penalty correct, or they say, you know what, our voters are going to be okay with us spending 25,000. Okay, we're just going to go for it.
But then in turn, our taxpayers here would be responsible for the BFA, or that, because we're the same.
We would be with BFA,
Right.
so that is a single unit under some of those plans.
Gotcha.
It's that mindset shift that we had to make, like when you all were like an Enosburg board and you were Richford
I totally
board.
get it. I'm just curious how it's gonna roll out without it immediately affecting like our buildings, our teachers. Like,
If the foundation formula went into place, our teachers would have a pretty positive impact because you can't, they're not gonna take Maple Run's salary and tell all those teachers, we're not gonna pay you what FNESU makes. Like that's not gonna work. So within a merged system, if we went to a county level, our teachers would be brought up to what that Maple Run salary or grid would be. So that part isn't a cost savings, but for our teachers, they would see a financial positive impact.
Now, again, Morgan, you said taxpayers wouldn't be voting on this. So would they just be told, this is how much your taxes are? I mean, how does that?
Yeah, we would tell them this is what your budget is. We're going with the minimum spend. And then the state, when they finalize the numbers in June, July, August, are going to say this is what your tax rate is.
Morgan, where does the funding come for the infrastructures, for fixing all your buildings?
Great question. Nobody knows yet. Ultimately, it's going to come from us, but where that comes from, who knows?
They're at least talking about it, and they haven't been talking about school construction aid for a couple of decades. Okay, anything else?
That could be a huge cost. Yeah.
And there's already a huge cost on the books because when they did the facility study, do you remember what the number is in terms of the deferred maintenance in the schools?
It's astronomical.
It's a huge number in order to maintain the number of schools that we're operating and be able to bring them up to where they need to be, in addition to the obligation that we have on the book right now for all of the schools who've tested positive for PCBs. We're not in a good position.
Yeah, They made us do that, and then they're like, sorry, there's no money.
Well, they made us do that with a promise that they would fund
Right.
the remediation.
Right.
We have
Never
two
did.
schools, it's not on this district, so we don't talk about it here.
Yeah.
But we have both Berkshire and Sheldon that have PCBs. We are not as impacted as Burlington High School was or North Country. But we've been down 2 classrooms in Berkshire for 3 school years. And in Sheldon, it's the whole gym section of the building, but it hasn't impacted our use because of the levels and the amount of time kids spend in there. So that all has to be
Burlington
contended
will
with
bring in
in
this
this.
one.
We all paid for it
Yeah.
because it's a statewide
That's
system.
what I'm saying.
I think to your point, the point that you're struggling with this new board, it was maybe a little easier lift on this side going through the merger that you were here for, because we were already operating as an SU. We were relatively equal in spending. On the NMV side, when Sheldon was brought in, it was a different system, and that board sort of had to come to grips with the relative.
In a merged system, yeah. Let's just think about some of the other things that come up when people are talking about governance structure and redistricting, is that idea of local control. That's something you read about a lot in the paper. People are fighting hard to maintain the local control that they have. So I think when we think about the local control, it comes, in my mind, there are really 3 buckets, and I might be missing something, but I think that that idea of governance, right? Like that was something, before we merged, people were very freaked out about Enosburg-Richford working together under one governance structure. So I think governance is something people worry about. I think people worry about our smallest schools. Are they still going to exist at the end of this? And I think people worry about losing tuition for those few students that have it and are accessing it outside of our system. Is there
And
any?
funding too.
Yeah.
They definitely worry about funding.
Anything that you want to add in for Sarah to think about and for me to think about in terms of supporting her around the redistricting and anything that falls into that local control umbrella?
I think the biggest thing is the dollars, the funding. I really do. I think it's going to come down to with taxpayers is how much more is it going to cost to redistrict for these bigger schools coming in? Because we're such small schools. And
things that I hear when it comes to schools, I've heard people talk about regional high schools, is it merged middle schools and local elementary schools. So when people are talking about the big ideas, I often hear those things. So you might have like the idea of a bigger comprehensive high school, but then thinking about middle schools, maybe regionally there are pockets that come together and build smaller regional high school, middle schools, and then trying to maintain the local elementary schools. But there's a problem with that thinking too, because if you pull your middle school out of those K-8s, then they fall into some of those levels of potentially micro schools, right, where they're super small.
I think related to that, there's, I understand the desire to have smaller boards to protect smaller schools, but that only goes to a certain point. And so, Kelly, one of our great pickups, was the last principal of Holland Elementary. They are a standalone district. The voters eventually said that this school was not big enough to be viable, but because they were a standalone, their option was to tuition their kids out. And so they're sending all their kids to, I think, Derby. And they have no control over the Derby school. They only get to write the checks. Whereas if Holland and Derby had been a single governance unit, maybe with another town, they could have had the discussion about, well, maybe we'll have Holland be our pre-K 2 school. And Derby would be 3 through 8. And you can't have those conversations if you're on an island by yourself.
There are a lot of those Holland-type situations around the state that are having some of these conversations because we've been pretty lucky to not see the significant population decline that others in other parts of the state have seen, like what you experienced in Holland. And definitely the southern part of the state is really struggling with that. So these conversations are really hard and they're happening now in local school board discussions. I think we've already talked about partnerships with other districts and potential configurations that have been considered. Does anybody want to say anything else related to that? Does anybody have a burning desire to take a position as a board?
Tell me now. Tell me now.
Your position is you want property taxes and education effectiveness to go up.
It's easy peasy, Nate.
Right?
Yeah.
We're coming from an area that we didn't pass our pass our budget for back to back.
Doesn't matter.
Right, so,
Right. It took us 3 tries that year.
yeah, so,
It's tough. I often find myself when there are conversations about this statewide, and I'm in a room with people that they're just looking at it from a very different lens because of where they're sit position-wise now. So they look at some of these things just very, because our context is totally different.
So how much say are we gonna have in it? Event, somebody's going to make the decision.
The legislature is going to
Okay.
make the decision. You have the say in terms of your advocacy, right? So you can, like, you have legislators in front of you on Thursday, and they want to hear what people are talking about in these board meetings, because this is all building their background knowledge for when these conversations happen during the legislative process. And you always have the ability to write to your legislators. There are sometimes opportunities that will come up to go testify in front of a legislative committee about your experience or your point of view. But ultimately, where this goes is going to be decided upon in Montpelier this year.
And I think you're more effective if you have suggestions for them other than do nothing, because if we do nothing, we're gonna be spending 50 grand per kid with it.
I mean, we're
Before I
not,
retire.
but,
We as a state.
yeah. So that'll be easy to put together, right, Sarah?
yeah.
I think that is the last slide, right, Courtney? The only thing I have more than we've done with everybody else is to go back.
Yeah, just want to do this, right.
That's it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we'll go right into the principal's report. Kelly?
Everything is informational. I highlighted earlier the piece about
Beth?
Everything's informational. I'll just do a quick highlight that our middle school partnered with the Heart Association, and all the middle schoolers were trained in hands-only CPR. It was a cool experience.
That's awesome.
You're still doing that?
What?
You're still doing just hands-only CPR?
Yeah.
that's supposed to be what it is now, I should have found that out, the Red Cross.
When I got off the fire department when we moved up here 4 years ago, and we had switched to that.
Jen?
All informational. Something exciting I'd like to mention is that our new music teacher, Rebecca Sylvester, we would like to teach the kids with recorders how to carry tunes and stuff. And we didn't have the recorders, so she and Melissa McKinstry got together and they made a prototype through the 3D printer, and so kids have made their own recorders and they're now learning how to play them. So it's kind of
Nice.
That's awesome. I know another school that did that, and they did a cost comparison of what it would have cost to purchase a recorder versus what it cost to produce one on the 3D printer, and Was it you?
We made them, I don't know if we did that piece, but we also made them.
Yeah.
No.
One of the music teachers told me, and it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anthony?
It's all informational. Like Beth, our middle schoolers are going through the hands-only CPR and training as well. Just to highlight, like the one section I talked about in my report was Expo and the planning that we're doing involving students this year. We decided after meeting with the students that we didn't want to rush and have one in January just to have one. And so we're going to put a lot of thought and planning into having a big showcase in the spring for the students. And it's going to be a really authentic learning experience where kids are going to have opportunities for different indicators and building different ELO opportunities into it and just make it a real event. And so doing that in the spring.
Nate?
2 weeks from today, FFA Wild Game Dinner, open invite. It's worth stopping by and checking out some of the harvest that the kids have got over the past few months. They've all been Surf Safe certified, so they know to cook with their hands washed.
Great.
Come on
What
over.
time, Nate?
From 9 to 1, there'll be food available.
Okay, anything else from the board members? Okay. And we are all set with principal, we're going to go into executive for student.
So I think, can I recommend that you move to executive and then we move our location so that he can pick up the
Yeah.
cameras?
Sure. So, entertain a motion to go into executive.
You were right, I should have brought.
Yeah, no, hard.
Can
Have a
anybody
motion
make
to
that
go into
motion?
executive?
I'll make that
Okay,
motion.
Sarah made the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Are you